Welcome. Here begins the process of flower pollination. These particular flowers are lilies. Come in closer. Come on, the different parts of the lily will soon become clear. Here you can see the stamen, which is the male part of the flower. The anthers and filament are what make up the stamen. Did you know the pollen, which is the male gamete or male sex cell of the flower, is found on the anthers? The female part of the flower is called the carpel. Who knew flowers had both male and female parts? Well, you do now. The carpel comprises the stigma, style, ovary, and ovule, with the ovule being the female gamete of the flower. This bee is attracted to the lily because of its brightly coloured petals and sweet nectar. Pretty, isn't it? The bee is inside the flower trying to get to the nectar. The anthers are positioned inside the flower, so the bee has no choice but to brush past them on its way to the nectar. This means the pollen will transfer onto the bee, ready to be transported to another flower. Ingenious, right? The pollen is attached to the bee, and yes, now the bee is going to leave the lily. Let's follow, shall we? The bee has found itself another lily. I'm interested in what's going to happen to the pollen that travelled with it. Are you? See how the stigma is in the bee's way. The pollen transfers from the bee onto the stigma. The stigma is sticky, so the pollen sticks to it easily. Just amazing. Let's see what happens next. But we might need to go in a bit closer. Come on, we need to go really close. Once the pollen is transferred onto the stigma, the pollen tube starts to develop. Let's watch as it grows. This small tube grows up the style to the stigma and down into the ovary, where it stops once it reaches the ovule. Don't you think it's incredible that it knows when to stop? The pollen tube acts as a passage down which the pollen's nucleus travels to reach the ovary. And look, here comes the pollen's nucleus now. The pollen nucleus is then able to travel down the pollen tube to fertilize with the ovule nucleus, which is about to happen now. The male pollen nucleus fuses with the female ovule nucleus to form a genetically complete fertilized ovule. Now, as we're about to see, once formed, the fertilized ovule goes through a process in which it transforms into a seed. When the fertilized ovule first starts to develop, it is known as a zygote. When it develops further, it is an embryo. When fully formed, it is a seed. And aha! Now the process is complete. 2 lily flowers have reproduced and created a seed. This seed will go on to become a flower of its own once it has been transported to a suitable location in which to grow. And then, yes, you've guessed it, the process starts all over again.